Eleanor Brooks stepped out of her weathered Honda Accord in the parking lot of Redstone Tactical Range, one of Texas's most prestigious shooting facilities. At 72, with silver hair neatly styled in a classic bob and wearing a pale beige cardigan, over khaki slacks, she looked more like someone heading to a library book club than a shooting range. The autumn sun cast golden light across the facility as sleek black SUVs dominated the VIP parking spots. From one of them emerged the Ghost Ridge Marksmen, an elite shooting team known throughout Texas for their tournament victories and equally famous for their arrogance. They moved with coordinated precision, tactical shirts, combat boots, designer, sunglasses, and expressions that suggested they owned the place. Eleanor walked toward the registration desk, her soft-soled shoes making barely a sound on the concrete. Inside the reception area, fluorescent lights reflected off polished steel surfaces. The moment she entered, conversations dimmed. A few heads turned, their expressions mixing surprise with barely concealed amusement. "Can I help you, ma'am?" asked the young receptionist, her tone polite but confused. The bird-watching group meets on Tuesdays. A few chuckles rippled through the nearby shooters. Eleanor offered a gentle smile. "I have an appointment for the long-range shooting section. Eleanor Brooks." The receptionist's fingers paused over her keyboard, surprise flickering across her face. "Ah, yes. First time here? That's right. My grandson thought I should try something new at my age. He signed me up as a birthday gift. Another." Wave of soft laughter followed. Eleanor didn't react outwardly, but she heard every word clearly. Age might have slowed her hands, but it had sharpened her awareness of everything around her. A tall, muscular man approached, with the confidence of someone used to being the center of attention. "You must be Mrs. Brooks. I'm Brandon Hayes, head instructor. I'll be guiding you today." His handshake was firm but brief, his eyes betraying skepticism despite his professional smile. "Have you ever handled a firearm before, ma'am?" he asked, his voice deliberately louder than necessary. "It's been a while." "I might need a refresher," Eleanor replied calmly. Brandon nodded, already preparing his most basic explanation. But across the range, the Ghost Ridge team was setting up for their precision drills at the 1,000-yard line, sacred ground reserved for professionals only. Their captain, Chase Langston, glanced over with a smirk that suggested this day was about to become very entertaining. What none of them knew was that Eleanor Brooks wasn't just any grandmother trying a new hobby. Hidden in her modest sedan was an old leather case containing secrets that would shatter every assumption they'd made about her. The only question was whether she would reveal them or let them dig their own graves with their arrogance first. The first humiliation, Brandon led Eleanor to a side range, away from the main facility, where fewer eyes would witness what he expected to be an embarrassing display. His teaching style immediately shifted into kindergarten mode, slow, loud, and condescending. "This is the stock, this is the trigger, and remember, never point your gun at anything you don't intend to shoot," he explained, adjusting her stance, like she was a wooden mannequin. Eleanor nodded patiently, letting him position her arms and shoulders. She could feel the weight of curious stares from other shooters, but she maintained her composure. Brandon placed a paper target at 50 yards, practically point-blank range for someone with her hidden background. "Don't worry, we'll start simple and work our way up," Brandon said, barely suppressing a patronizing smile. Just as Eleanor was preparing to take her first shot, Chase Langston strolled over, energy drink in hand, his walk leisurely and confident. "First time, ma'am?" he asked, with feigned politeness. "Yes, my late husband used to hunt, but I never tried. Thought I'd see if it's any fun." Chase's smirk widened. "Well, let's hope the recoil doesn't knock you off your feet." The women in my family won't even touch at 22. He clapped Brandon on the shoulder and walked away, leaving a trail of chuckles from the Ghost Ridge team. Eleanor remained composed, but her eyes briefly hardened, a flash of steel that Brandon missed entirely. Eleanor took the rifle, adjusted the scope, and fired. The shot veered wide of the target, embedding itself in the dirt backstop. No worries. The first shot is always the hardest, Brandon reassured her, his relief obvious. What Brandon didn't realize was that Eleanor was deliberately missing. She was studying the rifle's characteristics, feeling its recoil, understanding its trigger sensitivity. She was calibrating, not failing. But to everyone watching, she was just another elderly woman in over her head. From the main range, Troy Carter called out loud enough for everyone to hear, "Hey Brandon, maybe move her to the kids' paper targets. Might have better luck there." Laughter that followed was sharp and cruel. Someone else, Blake Turner, had already pulled out his phone, secretly recording. "This is going to blow up online," he whispered to his teammate. "Grandma's first day at the range." Eleanor heard every word, but her expression never changed. Her focus remained locked on the target, as if the mockery never reached her ears. But inside, she was making mental notes, not just about the rifle, but about every person who thought her age made her worthless. The stage was set for something none of them could imagine. Eleanor Brooks was about to teach them that assumptions could be very, very dangerous. The mockery intensifies as the afternoon wore on. The mockery grew bolder. The Ghost Ridge team had abandoned any pretense of subtlety, turning Eleanor's shooting session into their personal entertainment. Each time she deliberately missed or aimed incorrectly, another sharp-tongued joke rang out. "Mom, did you mistake the target for a newspaper?" Troy shouted, his laugh dry and cruel. "Those letters are much bigger." "Watch out, Grandma, don't hit the pigeons behind us," Blake added, pretending to check his phone for migration patterns, sending the others into fits of laughter. Brandon tried to maintain professionalism, but his patience was wearing thin. His instructions became curt and irritated. Every adjustment to Eleanor's posture now came with an audible sigh. Each time she missed, he'd glance over at the Ghost Ridge group with an expression that seemed to apologize for having to babysit a lost old woman. "Mrs. Brooks, maybe we should try a different approach," Brandon said, his voice strained. "Sometimes the fundamentals take longer to develop." Eleanor nodded agreeably, but her eyes were making careful observation. She noted how the wind shifted across the range, how the afternoon light changed the shadows, how each member of the Ghost Ridge team held their weapons. She was gathering intelligence while they gathered ammunition for their jokes. During a brief break, while Brandon adjusted the 100-yard target, Chase Langston approached again. This time, he didn't bother with pretense, leaning against the shooting bench with his arms folded. His voice dropped into a condescending tone that made Eleanor's skin crawl. "Look, I know you're trying, and honestly, no one wants you to feel embarrassed. But seeing you struggle like this is just uncomfortable for all of us." Eleanor gently set down her rifle and turned to face him, her eyes not angry, but cold and sharp as winter steel. "Is that so?" Chase hadn't expected her to respond with such directness. He took a slight step back but kept his smirk. "What I mean is, there are more suitable activities, you know. Thursday's a ladies' night here. Wine, closer targets, lighter guns, much more pleasant and relaxed. Just right for someone like you." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly do you mean by someone like me?" Chase's smile stiffened, but he pressed on. "Well, how do I put this delicately? Physically speaking, women aren't as naturally gifted for precision shooting. No offense, just biology. Weaker upper body strength, slower reflexes, You understand, right? Eleanor said nothing for a long moment. She simply nodded once and looked straight into his eyes, just like how people once said women couldn't drive well, couldn't do math, couldn't serve in combat. Chase opened his mouth to reply, but Eleanor didn't give him the chance. And yet Annie Oakley consistently outshot Frank Butler back in 1875. I guess she was a biological anomaly. Chase frowned. He wasn't used to being countered with historical facts. That was a different time. Now it's about technology, precision machinery, modern competition. Today's shooting is a completely different game. Absolutely. The world changes every day, Eleanor agreed with a faint smile. And the one thing that never seems to change is the arrogance of those who think they're the center of the universe. Her words cut through Chase's discomfort like a blade. Just then, Brandon returned with the new target, interrupting the tension. "Mrs. Brooks ready to try 100 yards? Just call me Eleanor," she replied, turning her gaze away from Chase as if he no longer existed. But something had shifted in that moment. The mockery had crossed a line, and Eleanor Brooks was about to show them exactly what that meant. The 100-yard target was larger and easier to see, but twice the distance of Eleanor's previous attempts. She deliberately missed her first few shots, drawing another round of laughter from the Ghost Ridge team. "Did anyone check if she's even wearing her glasses?" someone shouted. This time, Brandon said nothing. He just crossed his arms and watched silently, his expression shifting from amusement to growing suspicion. By the fifth deliberate miss, Eleanor could see the wheels turning in his head. "Mrs. Brooks," Brandon said finally, shaking his head, "I think we should call it a day. Honestly, the 100-yard target might be too ambitious for your current skill level. We need to be realistic about expectations." Eleanor didn't reply immediately. She placed the rifle down carefully and turned to face Brandon, her voice low but firm. "What if I told you I could hit the target at the end of the range, the 1,000-yard on? What would you say then?" The air went completely still. Every conversation stopped. Brandon laughed, but it sounded forced. "I'd say you've gotten heat stroke. That target is for professionals only. Even the guys in Ghost Ridge don't always hit it consistently." "You must be joking." Eleanor simply nodded. "Is that so?" Then she slowly walked over to her bag on the bench. From it, she pulled out an old leather case, its brass clasps dulled with age, but still solid. The case looked like it had traveled many miles and seen many battles. "May I use my own rifle?" she asked quietly. Brandon raised an eyebrow. "You have your own rifle, of course?" "A gift from an old friend." When Eleanor opened the case, the laughter from the Ghost Ridge team stopped cold. Inside was a custom sniper rifle, meticulously maintained despite its age. It wasn't flashy or covered in tactical accessories, but every detail radiated precision and deadly purpose. The matte black coating, the high-end optical scope, the solid bipod. This was a weapon built for one thing: perfection at extreme distances. Brandon tilted his head, his voice suddenly uncertain. That's not a standard hunting rifle. That's a custom competition piece." Without Brandon's help, Eleanor began assembling the rifle with such speed and precision that everyone fell silent. She was no longer the fumbling elderly woman from earlier. Every movement was swift, exact, economical, the muscle memory of someone who had done this thousands of times under pressure. Brandon instinctively took a step back. The Ghost Ridge team exchanged glances, their mocking expressions replaced by confusion and growing unease. You actually know how to use that?" Brandon asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor looked up from her rifle, and for the first time that day, her smile carried no gentleness. It held mischief, power, and volumes of unspoken meaning. "Just wait and see," she said. "The transformation. was complete. Eleanor Brooks had shed her disguise, and the predator was about to reveal herself to the prey. The revelation begins. The atmosphere at Redstone Tactical Range dropped to absolute silence. Every eye was fixed on Eleanor Brooks as she gently loaded the first round into her personal sniper rifle, a weapon worn by years of use but radiating dignity and deadly purpose in her hands. At the main shooting line, the Ghost Ridge marksmen had abandoned their drills entirely. Chase Langston and his teammates stood frozen, their earlier arrogance replaced by dawning uncertainty. Troy was peering through a spotting scope, while Blake Turner, who had been filming Eleanor's supposed failures, now stood with his phone forgotten in his hand. Brandon Hayes remained beside her, arms folded, eyes glittering with doubt and growing fascination. He had seen many shooters, professionals, veterans, competition champions, but the way Eleanor handled her rifle, adjusted the scope, and read the environmental conditions didn't resemble anything he'd witnessed from an amateur. "Are you absolutely sure you want to attempt this?" Brandon asked softly, like a final warning. "The 1,000-yard target isn't a game. Just say the word and we can." "Call this off." Eleanor didn't answer. She simply settled into the prone position, resting her left shoulder on the support cushion, placing the rifle on its bipod, and adjusting her posture with the fluid grace of someone who had lived their entire adult life between bullet trajectories. Light breeze swept across the shooting range, carrying golden maple leaves from the distant trees. Eleanor tilted her head slightly, closed her eyes for one breath, as if listening to the wind's secrets, then opened them again. Her right eye aligned with the scope, her finger finding the trigger with perfect, practiced tension. The shot rang out like thunder across the range. Far off, where a white steel target sat like a tiny dot in the vast landscape, came a sharp, metallic sound. "Clang! That's a hit!" Troy exclaimed, his eye still pressed to the spotting scope. Brandon grabbed his own scope, turning it toward the distant target. In the hazy, shimmering image, a bullet hole sat clearly visible near the dead center of the target. "No way," Brandon murmured, his voice shaking. Eleanor remained motionless, saying nothing. She loaded the second round with the same mechanical precision, her hands steady as granite, her breathing controlled and rhythmic. "Crack! Clang! Another hit!" Blake shouted, his voice no longer mocking, but genuinely excited. The third round slid into the chamber. Eleanor held her breath halfway, squeezed the trigger with the patience of a surgeon. This time, the metallic clang came less than a second after the shot. Brandon lowered his spotting scope, his face pale as winter snow. He turned to the Ghost Ridge team, who stood frozen like statues. "She just created a perfect triangle," he said, his voice nearly cracking. 3 shots within a 1-inch radius at 1,000 yards. Chase Langston tightened his grip on his rifle, his jaw clenched. What had just happened defied everything he thought he knew about shooting. Even seasoned professionals with decades of experience couldn't consistently land 3 consecutive shots with such precision at that distance. Eleanor slowly sat up, removed her ear protection, and surveyed the now breathless shooting range. She said nothing, simply took a soft cloth and began cleaning the barrel of her rifle as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Brandon was the first to break the stunned silence. "Who are you?" Eleanor looked up, her gaze cutting through the twilight like steel. "Just an older woman trying a new hobby," she said, with that same gentle smile. But Brandon's hands were already shaking as he pulled out his phone, typing frantically into the search bar. Seconds later, his eyes widened as if he had just discovered buried treasure. The truth was about to surface, and it would change everything. The legend, revealed Brandon's phone screen, glowed in the fading afternoon light as he stared at the search. Results, his face cycling through disbelief, recognition, and awe. The silence stretched across the range like a held breath. "Eleanor Harrison," he whispered, then looked up at her with wide eyes. 1982 National Sniper Championship winner, 1984 world record holder, then you just disappeared. Chase stepped closer, his voice hoarse. "Harrison? Wasn't that name mentioned in military training camp?" Brandon nodded slowly, his voice barely audible. "Eleanor Harrison. She got married, changed her name to Brooks. That's her. That's actually her." The revelation hit the Ghost Ridge team like a physical blow. These men who had spent hours mocking her, laughing at her appearance, questioning her right to be there, now stood face to face with a living legend, someone they had believed was just a myth, a story blown out of proportion by old-timers. Eleanor continued cleaning her rifle calmly, as if she had never left the competitive shooting world, as if 30 years had done nothing to dull the skills of a true master marksman. From across the range, a tall woman with black hair approached. She was Alexis Morgan, one of Redstone's senior instructors and a former Marine sniper herself. Eleanor recognized the look in her eyes, the look of someone who had seen real combat, who understood what those 3 perfect shots truly meant. "I'm Alexis, instructor here," she said quietly. "What you just did? That was a masterclass, a reminder to all of us about what real skill looks like." Eleanor smiled and gave a modest nod. Sometimes people need to be underestimated to realize how far they've strayed from respect and humility. The Ghost Ridge team, those same men who had treated her like a joke just hours earlier, now looked awkward and ashamed. They stood like students who had just realized they'd been laughing at their own legendary teacher. Brandon stepped closer, his voice low and reverent. "You held the national record for nearly 2 decades. Why did you disappear from competition?" Eleanor looked at him, then glanced at the Ghost Ridge team, some still gripping their rifles tightly, while others had quietly removed their sunglasses as if to show proper respect. "I didn't disappear," she said calmly. "I just moved on to serve in other ways." "You mean military?" Chase asked, for the first time that day without a trace of arrogance. "Not officially," Eleanor replied, but her slight smile told those who knew the field everything they needed to understand. In those years, many elite shooters were quietly recruited for classified programs, missions that would remain forever redacted from public records. Brandon suddenly bowed his head deeply. "I owe you an apology. Not just for today's treatment, but for forgetting that skill, and wisdom don't diminish with age. I'm honestly ashamed of how I behaved." Eleanor nodded slightly, her gaze neither harsh nor indulgent. She had lived long enough to distinguish between genuine remorse and empty words. "You have potential, Brandon," she said quietly, "but you've been teaching from ego, not from the heart. When you focus on proving yourself rather than truly helping others learn, nobody benefits." One by one, the Ghost Ridge team stepped forward, their earlier arrogance replaced by genuine humility. The legend had revealed herself, and now they had to decide what they would do with this unexpected gift of wisdom. The lesson and transformation Troy was the first to step forward, his voice much softer than it had been all day. "Mrs. Brooks, Eleanor, I'm sorry for the jokes earlier. I truly didn't know. I just assumed—" "You assumed that an older woman in plain clothes driving an old car couldn't possibly know anything about precision shooting," Eleanor finished for him, her tone not accusatory, but simply truthful. "That doesn't make you a bad person. It just makes you human." We all make assumptions. Troy lowered his head, his face flushed with genuine shame. Chase Langston, who had been the ringleader of the mockery, also stepped forward. Gone was the swagger, the half-smile, the condescending tone. I used to think I was the best shooter in the state. I train every day, study every type of ammunition, every weather pattern. But after today, I realize I've barely scratched the surface of this craft. Eleanor nodded and motioned for him to step closer. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. We've all been there, Chase. Confidence is essential, but without humility, it blinds you. And a precision shooter cannot afford to be blinded by anything. Not by ego, not by assumptions, not by the need to prove superiority. The atmosphere at Redstone had completely transformed. What had been a place of ridicule and derision was now wrapped in attentive, respectful silence. Eleanor had become the center of attention, but not for her fame, for her wisdom, her composure, and her grace under pressure. "Ma'am," Blake Turner spoke hesitantly, his phone now forgotten in his pocket. "Would you mind checking my shooting position? I keep missing targets at 800 yards and I can't figure out why." Eleanor smiled and motioned for him to assume his stance. For the next hour, she quietly observed each member of the Ghost Ridge team. She didn't judge or criticize, she simply adjusted a wrist here, corrected an elbow angle there, demonstrated how to feel the wind against the cheek and temple. "Don't. Just look at the target," she instructed as Blake prepared to shoot. "Feel it. Your eyes are just tools, but your mind is what shapes the bullet's path." The lesson went deeper than technique. She taught them about patience, about respect for the craft, about the humility required to truly master anything worth mastering. Alexis watched from nearby, arms crossed, her expression one of deep admiration. "You should come back and teach. Regularly, not just for them, but for every generation that needs to learn these lessons." Eleanor looked at her, then at the Ghost Ridge team gathered around her like eager students. "I didn't come here by accident," she said, slowly. "I've been following your team's progress for the past year. 3 tournaments, and you all have raw talent. But you've plateaued because you forgot the foundations of marksmanship and, more importantly, the character that true skill requires." Brandon's eyes widened with sudden understanding. "You came here specifically to teach us. This whole thing, letting us mock you, pretending to be a beginner, it was all intentional." Eleanor didn't answer directly. She simply looked at her watch, then began packing her rifle back into its worn leather case. "Next Tuesday, 9 a.m., I'll be back. And I'll bring some of the women shooters who've been dismissed by attitudes like yours. Talent exists everywhere. It just needs someone willing to recognize it." Chase's face lit up with something he hadn't felt in years, genuine excitement about learning. "You'll actually train us? For real?" "I'll share what I know," Eleanor replied with a gentle smile, "if you're willing to learn with the proper respect and humility." The sun was setting now, casting the range in golden light. Eleanor Brooks had arrived as a target of mockery and was leaving as a revered teacher. But more importantly, she had reminded everyone present that true strength often comes in the most unexpected packages. The legacy as Eleanor walked toward her modest Honda Accord. Every step was followed by respectful eyes. The Ghost Ridge marksmen still stood at the range, but they were no longer the arrogant group that had arrived that morning. They were quietly practicing the adjustments Eleanor had taught them, testing new techniques, approaching their craft with newfound humility. "Chase, check my breathing pattern," Troy whispered, holding his rifle with the reverence of a beginner. She said, "Breathing sets the rhythm for the entire shot." "And remember what she said about your grip," Chase replied, his voice serious and focused. "Don't fight the rifle, work with it." Brandon stood nearby, frantically writing in his training notebook. Alexis approached him, smiling. "What are you documenting? Everything I learned today. Not just the techniques, the philosophy, the respect for the craft that I somehow lost along the way." Brandon looked up. "Today might be the biggest turning point in my coaching career." As Eleanor placed her rifle case in the back seat, she heard soft footsteps behind her. She turned to find Ryan Mitchell, the youngest member of the Ghost Ridge team, and ironically the one who had been most vocal in his mockery earlier. "Mrs. Brooks," he said quietly, hands in his pockets, face red with embarrassment. "I know I don't deserve to apologize, but I need to try anyway." Eleanor studied him for a long moment, not with anger, but with the careful observation of someone who had learned to read character. If you believe you don't deserve to apologize, then you already understand the weight of what you did wrong. Recognizing that is the first step toward growth. Ryan took a deep breath and pulled something from his pocket, a red armband bearing the Ghost Ridge logo worn during competitions. "If you'll accept this, I want you to know we're ready to learn. Not because you're a legend, but because today you taught me something no manual or instructor ever could. That respect isn't earned by what you can do, but by how you treat others." Eleanor accepted the armband, folding it carefully and tucking it into her cardigan pocket. "Good, Ryan. Then next week, don't just come to shoot. Come to listen, to learn, and to grow." As she drove away from Redstone, Eleanor caught glimpses in her rearview mirror of the transformation continuing. Brandon was already sketching plans for a new, humility-based training program. Alexis was making notes about female shooters to invite to upcoming sessions. Chase was completely reorganizing his team's training schedule around the principles Eleanor had shared. The radio played softly as she drove through the Texas evening, and Eleanor smiled to herself. One day, one rifle, 3 bullets, and an entire group of skilled shooters had been transformed. But more than that, she had rediscovered something she thought was lost forever: the joy of teaching, of passing on not just technical skills, but life lessons. Her phone buzzed with a text from her grandson. "How was your first day at the shooting range, Grandma?" Eleanor chuckled as she composed her reply. "Turns out I still remember a thing or two. Same time next week." Within days, a secretly recorded video of Eleanor's 3 perfect shots at 1,000 yards went viral across social media, drawing hundreds of thousands of views. But the comments weren't mocking. They were filled with respect and admiration. Age doesn't determine precision. Mindset does. I've seen Marines miss at this distance. She landed 3 in a row. Unreal. This is what real skill looks like. Humble, quiet, devastating. Brandon launched his new training program called Foundational Respect in Precision Shooting, inspired directly by Eleanor's philosophy. The Ghost Ridge team entered their next competition season with an entirely different approach, focusing on fundamentals and character development rather than flashy equipment and ego. At Eleanor's first official training session the following Tuesday, no one was absent. Not just the Ghost Ridge team, but shooters from across Texas who had heard about the legendary woman who had emerged from retirement to teach hard lessons about respect, humility, and true marksmanship. Eleanor stood before them, her eyes focused, like a perfectly calibrated scope, and began with a simple sentence. "What makes a great shooter isn't the eyes or the equipment, it's the heart. The eyes see the target, but the heart understands why precision matters." And so the legend of Eleanor Brooks continued, not as a story of past glory, but as a living example of how courage, wisdom, and quiet strength could transform not just individuals, but entire communities. She had proven that true mastery never fades. It simply waits for the right moment to emerge and teach the next generation what really matters. The old woman they had laughed at had become the teacher they never knew they needed. And in doing so, she had reminded everyone that the most powerful lessons often come from the most unexpected sources. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.